meeting, this work session of the James City County Board of Supervisors to order. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Porter, good afternoon. If you call the roll.
Mr. McGlinnis?
Here.
Ms. Tyson?
Here.
Ms. Sadler?
Here.
Mr. Hips? Here. Ms. Larson? All are present.
Thank you very much.
Last roll call.
Yes, last roll call. With that, we move to board discussions and Davenport financial update. Do I look at, you want to kick us off, Ms. Mellon?
Sure. If you recall in the adopted budget, we have a planned borrowing for some fire apparatus and major school maintenance items. And so we are planning on doing that borrowing in this fall. And so Courtney Rogers is here from Davenport to sort of go over the financing plan that we have in place.
All right. Thank you so
So now
much.
that Sue's done the first slide. No, that's all right. Sue and I have been talking about this. You've got the new money projects, about $15 million that was in your CIP. A couple fire trucks and school projects. We're going to be financing those over 20 years. And you might recall that with the change in the tax code that took effect January 1, one of the things that they took away from us, from the localities, was the ability to advance refund, meaning to refinance bonds at any time. Now you can only refinance them when they're within 90 days of the call date or the day that they're first optionally redeemable. We did some bonds in 2009, about $8.9 million there of taxable bonds. You might recall that was part of the Build America bond, back when the stimulus, if you would, to try to get things going. As a part of that, you issued taxable bonds, and the federal government was going to give us a subsidy to knock the rate down to where it was similar to being a tax-exempt bond, even actually a little better, which is why we didn't issue tax-exempt bonds at that time. Then, of course, within a few years later, the federal government decided to knock down the subsidy that they were giving us to, I think it's like 6.6% is where it finally ended up. So we don't get 100% of what they promised us from day one.
Surprise.
Yeah, right. So with that, we're monitoring it. Interest rates on the left-hand side, you can see since 2000 have trended downward. Obviously, there's been some spikes. But what we've started to see, it bottomed out really right before the presidential election in the summer of 16. You'll see the arrow showing you where rates were at the presidential election. Basically, it jumped about 50 basis points within 3 days. And it was really because Trump was talking about rebuilding infrastructure, and that and the market read into that there was going to be deficit borrowing. And so they said, that means interest rates are going to jump up. Well, of course they didn't, and you can see that over the course of the next several months, and it's trickled back down. But then we're starting to see it basically earlier this year trickle back up. And part of that is just the economy getting better. And so at least we're not seeing huge spikes. We're just seeing little trickles here and there. But that said, as Sue and I were talking about it, we thought, let's go ahead and get the $15 million borrowed before rates continue to rise against us. And then two, it just so happens that the window opens up for us in mid-October. The call date for these 09 bonds is January 15 of next year. So October 15 would be within the 90-day window. So we just have to be able to close within that window. So currently, this is what your existing tax-supported debt looks like. You can see the debt service really starts to fall. The real drop is, of course, some of the school bonds that are dropping off in 2026 and 2027. We have a very good payout ratio, which means how much principal is being paid in the next 10 years. And you can see that darker green, there's quite a bit being paid off to the point that roughly 80% of our debt's paid off in 10 years. That's something that rate agencies look at, especially for strong AAA entities like ourselves. We want to make sure that we're not dragging our debt out. We're actually paying it off pretty rapidly. So looking back again at the 2009 bonds, we've assumed that we would close this in November. Right now, so the coupons, again, these are taxable bonds, and we're looking to refinance these with tax-exempt bonds. But we have to take into account the fact that we have that subsidy, and we're assuming the subsidy continues at the rate, which is basically 6.6% below what they originally promised us. So right now, it is borderline. So one of the things that we typically look for in and a refinancing, you'll see that percent savings number toward the bottom at 3.75. We typically look for 3% sort of our number. That's sort of a bogey of the savings, and that is basically the net present value divided by the outstanding amount of the existing bonds. And so we're above that right now. We'll be tracking it and keeping up with it. We'll have to make a decision when we get closer to the sale whether it still makes sense or not. I look at it as we're sort of squeezing what we can out of the term at this point. It's a little over $250,000 of savings there. Every little bit helps. As rates are rising over the next several years, we may not have the opportunity again until, for who knows when that cycle comes back down and rates come back down. But when that does happen, we have fewer years to get the savings back. So it makes it harder as you go along and get closer to the final maturity to actually achieve savings. So our recommendation is let's keep our eyes on it and use that 3% sort of as a guideline to when we get closer to the sale date. Our estimated for the new money debt service, we're thinking right now at about 20 years that we're going to be in the 3.5% on a tax-exempt basis. Still a very good rate for borrowing. We always look at how that affects our three key ratios. The two here on the next two slides are debt to assessed value, outstanding debt divided by basically the assessed value of the county, which is real and personal property combined. That's a measure the agencies look at in terms of if in a pinch things went south, your ability to raise revenues to pay the debt service. And so you can see our ratio is still around 1%, even with the projected new money, which is the blue, well below the 3% policy that you have in place. And then the other one is that we look at from a debt service to revenues. Basically, think of it as how much annual debt service you're paying versus your budget. And in this case, you can see, again, the blue projected on top of the green existing debt service, still well below the 10 and the 12% targets that we have there, the higher and lower targets. And then finally, the payout ratio, earlier it was right at 80%, still very strong at 76%. So that's a good number for us, well above our policy of 60. So where we are is we're looking for coming back to you on October 9th with the actual documents to approve to move forward. Both these bonds will be issued as lease revenue bonds. We've talked to bond counsel. We'll be issuing as one bond, so they'll be combined together. So there won't be a Series A, Series B. So it'll be one bond issue. We will need to go through the EDA, which we're looking to go to them on the 11th of October. We are looking, it's been a number of years, believe it or not, so we are looking back. It's been a long time since we've actually had the rating agencies, 10 years, to see what's going on in the county. Even though we're AAA across the board, we don't take them for granted. Still want to have them come in and see. We've got some new analysts that have never been here. So we've talked to them. We've got them lined up. They're actually going to be in Richmond on the 26th and 7th, I believe, is the Thursday, Friday, 25th, 26th. They're actually going to be in Richmond for the Virginia GFOA, which is the Government Finance Officers Conference. They're speaking on Friday. So we're actually going to have them in a couple of days before that while they're in town. So makes it nice, a good trip for them if they can add some business to on top of the conference. So then we get the ratings back early November. We're not anticipating any changes. Things are still looking very good. We're working on the credit presentation as we speak, and we'll have that ready to go in late October. And we're working on the POS, which we would mail out on the 7th, and then we're looking to sell the bonds around the 13th of November. And they close basically by 1st of December. Happy to answer any questions that you guys may have.
Can we get a copy of this presentation as well?
Yeah. I'd like one too.
I guess the only question I'd have would be about our expectations in terms of future borrowing, because obviously this is all based on the notion that we have this one borrowing that's coming up, but not anything beyond that. And in all likelihood, there will be other things that are going to percolate along. I know the Hipple building is sitting out there, and we might have some discussions about purchase of development rights and things like that. So, just kind of thought about what kind of flexibility we have in terms of future borrowing.
Right. looking back at the two graphics here, you can see we've got a lot of space in terms of debt to AV. That's usually not one that most facilities are running into. Right? Usually the second one there, which is the debt service to your budget. You can see you're probably 2/3 of the way to your top target there at this point in terms of, but that still means you've got some ability. If you think of that blue as 15 million, I mean, I can't do the math exactly, but you can see you've got probably, I don't know, 50, 60 million probably capacity, just eyeballing it right there at the current interest rate, of course, at 3.5%. As interest rates go up, that's going to squeeze that number a little bit. So there should be capacity. I'm not aware of larger projects that's in the CIP. I know this one has been in there for a little bit. She probably has a better feel for it than I do about anything that may be out in year 6 or beyond that in the CIP.
I think we have a placeholder for potential schools out in a couple of years, but really just as a placeholder because the policy hasn't been decided.
I think you're looking to probably firehouse coming up.
That's true in the firehouse, yeah.
I suspect, sounds like that between now and budget time that we'll be looking at some additional scenarios and cases.
I think a couple of years out, probably, I think it was about 30 million, if I'm not mistaken, between the multiple different projects.
And the one thing I'll say is you've got, when you look at the existing tax-supported debt there, there is a little bit of drop down. So there, from the standpoint of not having to find additional revenues in our budget, depending upon the size of the project we're talking about, looks like we can probably handle some of that without maybe having to take revenues away from other services that you've got, projects you may have out there.
Great.
Our reserve fund, what percentage is that of the total?
I didn't even do that.
It's 12.
Here.
Reserve fund, I don't think we do it by percentage. That's
Percent
right,
revs.
yeah. I think it's around 12%.
That's I thought it was around 12.
Yeah, we're doing very well on that particular one for fund balance, yes.
What is that? What would that do? How much would that change if we went up 1 or 2% in order to, if the economy does go south, to make sure that we're protected with employees and that sort of thing is, and kind of bank that off, and I know we agreed, I thought we agreed to like right around 12, but, in 8, it kind of, really bothered us a little bit as far as what the other board members had to do as far as cutting and watching what they're spending. But if the economy, which it will, go back down, it always does, it's part of life.
There's been a little bit of talk kicking that around.
Getting, in like 2021, going back down again. So is that something that we should be planning for now? Do we have enough to keep the ship like it's going now, or should we look at a 13 or a 14%? And how does that look as far as, Sue, you would know after you get back to your numbers, what does that do to everything else we're doing? I know it's going to give us a position of strength. And so it won't hurt us there at all. And then I'm just looking at the employees that are here. And if we do have a downturn, we can weather that out a little bit better than we were able to. They did what they needed to do, but, try to see if we can keep that from happening and make us as insulated as possible, because we're never insulated, but maybe think about making us a little more insulated.
1% is adding to that particular is about $1 million.
That's what I thought it was around $1 million.
So it's right around $1 million. We can provide for you like a fund balance analysis. We're actually they're working on the audit right now, and so we'll be able to give you what the change was between 2017 and 2018. And as part of the credit package, we will be making some estimates over the next couple of weeks, which will be fairly good because we're just about closed with the books. So we can give you an update on what all the fund balances are at this given point in time. And they are much healthier than they have been in the past. So, looking at a downturn, it would be a matter of maybe using, if you wanted to bump up those fund balances, being able to use fund balance for the one-time expenditures of your CIP, and maybe cutting back the annual contribution, because we have been very consistent, consistently increasing that annual contribution from the general fund to CIP.
Right.
And it's been a percentage of revenue. So if there is, a downturn, that will allow for, us still trying to be within that policy of transferring about 5% over. And then we could make up the difference with fund balance.
And I was thinking with this new tax that's coming on board, some of that can pay for some of the things that we're already doing now as far as towards tourism. And maybe that money that we're using now in our regular budget, that we could take that money and maybe use that as far as the fund balance and try to, work those numbers and maybe, be able to bump that up. And then if the economy were to go crazy in 21 or whatever, then it may end up being that, we bump that down during that time, but we've got the reserve we need to carry us through, however many years that may be, and keep our employees, here and working and keeping the county moving forward. That's my
Right. But I'll echo Sue's comments that the agencies don't want to see us using fund balance for ongoing expenses. So the idea would be to take what you've been putting aside for PAYGO capital and use fund balance for that.
Right.
Take the PAYGO capital money and use it for your ongoing. Because that is already in your budget.
Right.
And basically, because if you use one-time money, the question is always, what do you do next year?
Right.
So we're getting there the same way.
Right.
Sometimes the way we tell the agencies the story is very important.
I'll let y'all do that.
We will. Yes. So,
But you see where I'm headed.
yeah. Forethought, it's always a good thing.
Yep.
Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for all your hard work.
Thanks for
Yes, sir.
Going to bring our Workforce Housing Task Force update in.
Bring you up next. I'm like, wrong to
We need the filler music.
Yeah.
Rebecca or Paul, are you going to introduce everybody? Is that the way you want to do that?
These nice colorful nameplates.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're a group here, so.
That's great.
It's just Okay. So while we get our technology set up, I will introduce everybody who is here.
Thank you.
I'm Rebecca Benner, the Director of Social Services, and I'm co-facilitating the process with Paul Holt, the Director of Community Development. We have one of our co-chairs here, Ms. Jean Zeidler, who's going to be doing part of the presentation. We have Lisa Sturdivant, who is our consultant, who's going to be talking about the data. Vaughn Poller, who's the Administrator of Neighborhood Development. And then we have two members of our task force here, Ms. Jenny Wortman and Mr. Jack Haldeman. So Gina's going to take us off.
Okay, thanks. Madam Chair, members of the Board of Supervisors, and Mr. Porter, I want to say that I'm really pleased to be here today to provide an update on the work of the Workforce Housing Task Force. I have to say I really regret that the task force co-chair, Christina Hartless, was unable to be here today. She had a work obligation that couldn't be changed. But I want to say that as a relatively recent graduate of College of William & Mary, who has chosen to remain in this community to pursue her professional career, Christina has been the source of very valuable insights that have informed the work of this committee, because she has faced some of the challenges that we're learning about and I'm talking about. I am very lucky to have two of the members of the task force with us, two very engaged members, Jenny Wortman and Jack Hallman. So I want to thank them for being here today. And when the questions come, they'll answer. So I need a clicker. Oh, it's there already.
I can advance it for you.
In November of 2016, you adopted the 2035 strategic plan that includes the goal of expanding and diversifying the local economy. Among the ideas listed on the to do this in the plan was supporting strategies to facilitate the development of affordable and workforce housing. So, as you know, the county, in doing this work, first commissioned a housing conditions study by Virginia Tech researchers, and then following that, appointed the Workforce Housing Task Force to study those findings with the goal of making recommendations to you on strategies to address affordable and workforce housing challenges, including exploring partnerships and funding sources. The task force is 16 members strong and represents many perspectives and has a depth of knowledge in relevant areas. Jack, for example, represents the Planning Commission. Jenny is one of 5 citizen representatives. The chair of the EDA, the chair of the Board of Supervisors are both members, as are developers, one a market rate developer, another a workforce affordable developer. The realtor community is represented, Habitat for Humanity, business community, both through a large employer and through the Chamber Tourism Alliance, and then financial lenders, as well as the Regional Planning District Commission. So I think it was a great representative group with lots of knowledge to inform our deliberations and conversations. The mission with which the group was charged is pretty detailed, but I wanted to just mention its final bullet, and that is, quote, to link actionable steps to the Board of Supervisors' goals and to existing county plans. The task force held its first meeting in December 2017 and has been meeting monthly since that time. We invite public comment at every meeting, and our broad goals are twofold. One is to produce a plan that will encourage adequate, appropriate housing options with recommended strategy and implementation steps. But the other is also to build public consensus through education and outreach of what the needs in this community are. As we've talked about workforce housing, we've thought about it as housing that is affordable for anyone who has a job. And affordable, we defined as not paying more than 30% of the household income for housing. So a little later in this presentation, you'll see some of the data that we have looked at about that situation in James City County. One of the task force's first jobs was to articulate and adopt a vision statement and principles to guide our work. So on the screen is the statement and principles, which I'm going to read because they were carefully worded and agreed to by all task force members. The vision that we agreed to is that James City County will be a diverse community offering a high quality of life and quality, affordable housing options in safe, well-maintained, inclusive neighborhoods. The principles that we adopted are, first, that workers in James City County should be able to afford to live in the county if they so choose to do so. That James City County should promote strategies that create and sustain mixed-income neighborhoods. That creating a range of affordable housing options in James City County requires partnerships among the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. And that James City County's solutions for workforce housing should be designed to respect the county's unique natural, historical, and cultural resources. The work of the task force has been very well supported by excellent James City County staff, including Rebecca and Vaughn and Paul, but also 2 wonderful consultants, one of whom is with us today. So I'm going to now turn the presentation over to Dr. Lisa Sturdivant, who is going to review with you some of the data that the task force has been considering.
Thank you very much. And thank you to the members of the board for having us here today. I'm going to share a little bit of the data that the task force members had a chance to review, but they will tell you that they got to see lots and lots and lots of data. But what we wanted to do was to go through the data that we have and use that information to help understand the workforce housing needs, building off the work of the housing conditions study, helping the task force to develop strategies that are appropriate to the needs in the community, but also to help us learn how to talk about housing in a way that maybe hasn't been done before. Sometimes people think, well, housing affordable, that's not for me, or that's not my concern. To understand what the data actually mean, I think, was one of the things we focused on. So as I share some of the information that we put together, we looked both at the housing of current James City County residents, but we were also very interested in the housing situations of folks who may have a job here in the county but don't live here. And because those are sometimes the folks that we're sort of interested in figuring out if there are reasons why they may not live here and whether there would be benefits to having them live here. When we look at the current population, right now there are about 8,400 households here in James City County who are what we call cost burden, that is spending more than that 30% of their income on housing costs every month. That's about 30% of the population. And what the research has found is when households, individuals and families spend more than 30% of their income on housing every month, there's often too little left over for other things like food and transportation and medical care. And particularly those who are severely cost burdened, the 3,300 households here in the county who spend more than half of their income every month on housing, their gross income. So if you want to do the math in your head for your income, what that would be. But the other thing that we know about having a community where several thousand households are cost burdened is there's also implications for the local economy. If you're spending more than 30%, more than 50% of your income on housing every month, you're probably not going out to dinner. You're probably not buying stuff in shops, in local shops. You're probably not doing things like spending in the local economy to support local economic growth. So there's lots of reasons why we care about the fact that there are current residents who have cost burden. As I mentioned, we also flipped it and looked at, instead of the residents here, rather the workers here in the county. It's a little bit trickier because we're looking at households on the one hand and workers in this picture. But we know that there are about 7,400 workers, people who hold jobs here in the community who make $15,000 or less annually. That's full-time minimum wage, the full-time minimum wage job. And that includes about 5,200 people who live outside of the county and commute in every day. These are restaurant workers, these are retail workers, these are housekeepers. These are, by and large, the vast majority are not teenagers. People think minimum wage jobs are teenagers working minimum wage jobs. These are often people supporting a family. And if you look at someone making $15,000 a year, they can only afford about $375 a month. And even if there were two workers, you're sort of looking at affordability of about $750 a month. We found that and just to sort of reiterate something that Ms. Adler said, we found that when we talked about workforce housing, we spent a lot of time trying to define what that meant for us, right? Because some people define it as, you might have heard, 60 to 100% of area median income or something. That might have something you've heard with workforce housing. But we decided we wanted to look at the actual workers who are here. And this group of folks, this is an important part of the workforce. And so it didn't seem to make any sense, and you all will correct me if I'm mischaracterizing it, but it didn't make any sense to set our definition of workforce at a place that would miss these workers. So this is something I just want to emphasize, that we spent a lot of time thinking about this. There are also, when you look again at the households here and some of the other folks who are a little bit further up the income spectrum, we're thinking about childcare workers and housekeepers and bus drivers, people on the construction trade and bankers. These folks, when you look at them, about 3/4 of households with workers in these jobs are cost burdened. So these are folks you encounter every day, security guards, tax preparers. We had very, very detailed data from Virginia Tech, which I'll give you a little snapshot of, that went through all of the occupations, many, many hundreds of occupations. When we look at, again, workers a little bit further up the income spectrum, you can see that there's about 6,900 people who earn between $15,000 and $40,000 who commute into the county every day. So these are, again, folks who hold jobs that are really important to the local economy. They're driving in on the roads. They're coming in every day and taking their money to Norfolk or Virginia Beach or where else at the end of the day and spending it there instead of here. And so what we found is that folks earning up to about $40,000 a year can afford about $1,000 a month for housing, and there's only about 2,000 rental units at that rent level currently in James City County. And if you were looking at ownership, we're looking at houses at about $175,000, and there's only about 3,200 homes. So again, we're getting to about 2/3 of our workforce at this point. You can see the limited stock of housing that's affordable. And what the data sort of, as we pulled it all together, found that while it can be difficult for people at all incomes to find the housing that's right for them near their work, workers earning less than $40,000 have the most challenges finding affordable housing in the county. And you can see on the right some of the median owner costs and the median rent costs for people at different wages. And so we found that this data really suggests that as we think about strategies, that there really is a need to focus on ways to expand housing options for workers who fall in this category of, say, about $15,000 to $40,000 a year. This is a snapshot of some of the data that we looked at, and so we were able to look at these are the top occupations in James City County. So let's skip military occupations for a minute because we had a question about, I can come back to that one because it had a little bit of a quirk to it. But if you start with retail salespersons, this is the list in order of the greatest number of jobs here in the county. So the greatest number of jobs, if you were to classify them by occupation, are in these retail, cashier, food services, janitorial staff. You can see teachers comes in there, cooks. These are where the largest share of the workers in the economy. And I don't think anyone in the room is surprised. You know, when I was here with my family last time, we came here because we went to some historical sites, and we went to Busch Gardens, and we went out to dinner, and we stayed in a hotel. And the fact that tourism is such an important part of the local economy shouldn't surprise us. The orange shows those occupations where when the person is living by themselves, they can't afford the average or the median rent here in the county. So they just don't earn enough. Those industries, for various reasons, don't pay enough for them to afford the median rent. The yellow color are those where they can afford the median rent but not buying a home, and green are those where you can both afford the rent and the owner. The first column shows the results for folks who live by themselves. The second, though, is if we put two of them together, 2 retail salespersons, 2 cashiers, 2 waiters and waitresses, 2 cooks. Even with 2, they can't afford the median gross rent. And then similarly at the end is if you imagine somebody who's later in their career at the 90th percentile of their wages, even after working in those jobs for a long time, it's still difficult to be able to afford the rent. So this population was a group that we really focused on, but we did look at the population of working households who earned above $40,000 a year, and you can see some of the jobs: lab technicians, librarians, middle school teachers. Even among this group, between $40,000 and $60,000 a year, about 61% are cost burdened. It's often difficult to find homeownership opportunities. And then again, we looked a little bit further up the income ladder as well. And so what we came to the conclusion when we looked at all of the data is that when you look at what's available for the working population in the county, particularly those who are in the most common occupations, there's very little for sale or for rent units. And that these are in high demand. So even if the units are there, oftentimes they're occupied by people who have higher incomes because they're able to either bid up the rent or be more competitive in terms of getting those units. So I just want to, I'm happy to answer other questions as we have a discussion, but just wanted to conclude by turning it back over to Jean to emphasize this sort of importance that we're trying to bring to broad attention about the link between housing and local economic development.
There's some bullet points up there that I think are familiar to all of us. I mean, I think we're all aware that adequate housing is of great importance to our local economy, to a strong economy, because having adequate housing available affects recruitment and retention of talented workers and recruitment, retention of businesses. It impacts traffic congestion. It impacts health. Lack of housing opportunity discourages young people and young workers from staying in this community, and many more such impacts that affect the quality of life of everyone who lives in the county. So as the task force continues its work, we will continue on 2 tracks. As indicated on this slide, we'll implement a communications and outreach plan to grow awareness in James City County, in our community, of the needs and the situations here. We'll use social media posters on buses and in break rooms, presentations to community groups, and we will share what we have learned, to not only to share what we've learned, but also to solicit input and ideas for strategies and solutions from members of the community. And on a second track, our work will continue through our 4 subcommittees of the task force, which are listed there: preservation and rehabilitation, financial tools, affordable home ownership, land use, and zoning. Through those subcommittees, we'll continue to deepen our knowledge of best practices, what has worked or not worked in other communities, and try to identify those that may be promising for James City County so that we can develop recommendations to present to you and report back to you. So thank you for allowing us to share our work to date, and we're happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, go ahead, John.
I've got a couple of different things.
Me too. Let's go right ahead.
First of all, I want to say that I very much appreciate the effort that everybody's put into this. It's been a lot of commitment of time and energy. I had the opportunity to attend 2 of your sessions and found them to be very, very interesting. The scope of issues you looked at was extremely broad, and the engagement and interest of the participants was remarkable. Got a chance to see Ginny Wortman give a presentation the other night, and she did an outstanding job in laying out the issues there as well. I especially appreciate the fact that you're here so that we can give you some feedback on where board members would like to see some refinement or some emphasis. And I think it's not a secret. When we first put together this task force, I expressed the fact that my real concern was exactly where Dr. Sturban had placed it earlier, on the lowest wage earners and their ability to live and work in the community. Because while there are certainly other issues of affordability, they are much harder, I think, for local government to address successfully without sacrificing some other important values. But there are a couple of points in particular that going forward, I would hope that you would give some thought to. And the first is this. It seems to me, and I know that the city is undergoing a similar kind of examination, but we are a region. And James City County's affordable housing issue is not in isolation. It is part of a broader issue. And so when we talk about numbers of people who live and work in James City County or can't or don't live in James City County but work here and vice versa, it may be that they're in Williamsburg or in York. Frankly, a lot of our jobs are at the southern and northern ends of our county, where residents may be coming from Newport News or Hampton, from New Kent, King William, Surrey, other localities where people have chosen to live in a more rural setting, perhaps, And so I think there's something calling out for a bit more subtlety to the evaluation of the nature of this particular issue, and I'd hope that we'd be able to recognize that the picture of housing in James City County and the employment profile of James City County is part of a broader set of communities that may do a better or worse job in addressing issues of affordability. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think the range of issues that you're tackling is very impressive, but I don't want you to lose sight of the importance of prioritizing, because not everything is going to get accomplished. And for me, as I indicated, I'm particularly interested in how we address the needs of people who really have the fewest options. It's not a matter of the convenience of living in this community and working in that one, or living in the same community you're working in. It's the necessity. You don't have transportation. You have to find your job close to your home, and maybe you have a relative that you can stay with, and so forth. So I do think that prioritizing the issues relating to our lowest income citizens is extremely important. Again, I think that we're going to find that the place where we are most likely to be able to have an effect is where there is some governmental involvement, or where government and nonprofits can work together to accomplish particular objectives. That is to say, I'm less convinced that we should focus a lot of our attention on addressing policies that have anticipation about what the private market will do. Frankly, I believe James City County is a very desirable community, and that desirability attracts people here who sort of artificially inflate the price of housing that might otherwise be available for folks who are more in middle income ranges. And we're not going to be able to solve that by allowing greater density. We are the 10th fastest growing locality in the Commonwealth out of 130 some cities and counties, according to the latest census estimates for 2017. We've done in the past successfully, and one of the things that really excited me as I looked at the materials for your last meeting was the possibility of turning mobile home or manufactured home parks into privately owned facilities, where there's an opportunity for folks at lower ends to be able to build equity in a mobile home, in a manufactured home. And where we also see the quality of that community improve because of that ownership stake. I think that there's no question that one of the big issues that we face is not purely a housing issue. It is an income issue. And so finding ways to effectively advocate for higher salaries for entry-level work or for minimum wage work is something that would have an impact on the ability of people to reach their home ownership objectives. And I would also say that in terms of priorities that I'm looking for, I do think mixed income is a desirable thing to look for, but it's probably only going to be something we're going to be able to do where there is new development or significant redevelopment. And, it's kind of hard to go into areas that are already developed and to say, now we're going to change you and make you mixed income. Although a policy that I had a hand in, I will admit, our housing opportunity policies, I think, went too far in allowing us to count people at the houses that were at the 120% of the level of adjusted median income, which I think really kind of moves us beyond where we are most productive. So those are areas of prioritization. And finally, I just would say that I hope we'll also keep in the backs of our minds, maybe sometimes in the front, some of the unanticipated consequences of actions we might take. And in particular, I would point to the tendency of folks to want to engage in short-term rentals and what the use of housing for that purpose might do to reducing the stock of housing that might otherwise be affordable. And the allowance of accessory units, which I think can be very beneficial under certain circumstances, but can also quickly change the character of an affordable neighborhood into one that is not a single-family affordable neighborhood attractive to young families and the like, but a much more transient kind of location where you see speculators becoming owners of property and taking profit out, as opposed to allowing people the opportunity to build equity in their own ownership. So those are just some thoughts that I have as you're going forward. Again, I thank you very much for all the strong effort that's been going into this. And I realize that there are other things that might be, long-term objectives and goals we don't want to ignore. But if I'm looking for implementation, I think I'd like to see it focused on some things that are prioritized. Thanks.
Well, thank you for those comments. I think we all took good notes to take back to the task force. And
you can always watch me again on TV.
Yes. Put it on YouTube. But, I think one of the things that your comments underscored is what we recognize every time we walk into that room is that this is a very complicated issue, and there are no silver bullets. And but it is something that is extremely important for our community. And a few of the things you touched on, we have touched on at various meetings. I don't think we found a solution yet, but by December. No, I don't mean to be silly about it. It's very complicated. I appreciate your comments.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'd like to thank y'all all for all your hard work. This is a big elephant you're trying to get into the tent, and it's going to be very difficult, but I appreciate y'all, get out there in front of it, and we all know we need to do something about this. But remember, we can't have it all. There's no way to get it all done. And I might have to agree with John, if we take a chunk at a time and complete it, and that's going to help out a whole lot. On the TPO, if you look at some of the information they have, and as far as where transportation's going, people are traveling. It's amazing how many people go to Virginia Beach and how many people from Virginia Beach come to Williamsburg and James City County. It's mind-boggling. And you would think, well, wouldn't you like to work right where you live? But it's a tendency of people trying to move ahead. Well, I can make $1 more in Virginia Beach than I can make here, so I'm going to Virginia Beach. To me, I'd rather stay here and I'm enjoying James City County. Virginia Beach is a wonderful place, but I like James City County. You can't, unless we change our ways as a builder, you can't build affordable homes like we are in James City County. Not an affordable home to me is anywhere from 150 to 175. It's not the 320. It's not the 280. And it is if you compare our whole community. But as far as a couple or a single person, whoever starting out and trying to make a living, and they can't do it. And to build that house in James City County, unless we change some zoning and sort of some of that, it can't be done. I can tell you that right now. I do it every day. It can't be done. But that doesn't mean we can't change what we're doing and look at how we can do it. And I even talked about the campsites and that's why I'm changing those over to small homes. one step up at a time. A home that somebody can come in, and it may have 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen, and that's it. But it's just enough that you could get up and get going, and then sell that to the next person needs it, and you move forward and try to, make a stepping stone, because all of us have started out with a small home and then got a bigger home. Now we're going back to a smaller home. but as you build, it takes that, and there's no stock out there for it. And if you own a rental, of course, and if you're 1,000, even 1,200 on a rental, you're not making really anything by the end of the year. The person is renting it. And then by the time they repair it and fix it and get ready for the next person, they're breaking even. So, that's killing you on that side as well by the time you do taxes and everything else. So anything past that is out of everybody's reach. So to get it down to those numbers, it's tough for a rental person to be able to rent unless you're talking about apartments, townhouses, and start stacking up. When it's homes and small homes and all that, it's hard because of the amount of land you have, the taxes we pay, the water, the sewer. Once you start adding that up, the maintenance, repairs, and all that, you're not really making anything in that price point. But that's where the price point needs to be even a little lower in order for people to be able to afford it. So there's an issue right there as far as trying to figure out how do we get to that price point, because we have an expensive community, let's say. And it's good on one end because the higher the houses, the more revenue we get. The more revenue we get, we can put into this and move that forward. So it helps in one way and it hurts us in another. Because as we're building that revenue, we can pursue other avenues to try to help the people that don't have. And so y'all have a tough job right here. This is extremely tough.
You have a tough job.
Yes. Housing Partnership does a great job as far as sweat equity, getting people in a home, trying to keep it affordable, and looking at lots that maybe can be divided, a larger lot into 2 smaller lots. And then you don't want to create a neighborhood that is just affordable. You want to integrate everybody into everything. And that's tough to do because, trying to get a home that's affordable in a larger neighborhood sometimes can be very tough. So that's something that, maybe the lots go down a little bit. We have more density. But remember, as we create that, now we have more school children, more responsibility, more police, more fire. So as we're helping on one end, we're taxing on the other. So it's kind of a balance. How do we afford both? And that's going to be, that's extremely thin line to try to figure out. And I've been thinking about, how we can do something. And I thought about the campsites that we have that aren't in use anymore, the trailer parks. We said no more trailers in James City County years ago, and but trailers, manufactured homes, even manufacturing homes now and trailers are almost as expensive as a house being built. It's amazing the price points have come so close together because people were seeing that as an option. I can't afford to have someone build a house, so I'll get a trailer. Well, now they're just up almost, and you see just buy a camper trailer, what a camper trailer costs now compared to what they did years ago. So that's a tough thing that I would go with John and try to pinpoint 2 or 3 things and say, these are the 2 or 3 items that we're going to attack. With the EDA, we did the same thing, and they had a lot of things they wanted to do, and all great things and hard workers. And we told them the same thing: narrow it down to 2 or 3 things, and let's try to get those out of the way. And maybe we help a group of people by doing that, and then slowly move out from there. And but I commend you on your work and all the hard work you're going to do and you're doing now. And this is a tough item to try to put your hands on. That you want to help someone here, you don't want to hurt this over here, you want to make the community this, but you can't make that. And there was one other comment. Let me see. Let me just went off my screen. Hold 1 second. Your vision statement, it says, James City County will be a diverse community. I think it ought to read, and I know y'all already passed it, James City County is, because we've always been a diverse community. I mean, I went to school with everybody from Grove to Lenexa, and I'm still friends with a ton of them, and we still talk about that and how James City County's changed. And we're from all different backgrounds, and I wouldn't be in the position I am without knowing all those people that have touched my life. So I would look at that being, not will be, but is, because that's what we are, and we're just trying to make it even better and promote that. Thank you all.
I think we agree with you on that. I don't think that was just to say that it is not a diverse community, but it was a vision for the future about inclusive neighborhoods and that sort of thing. So your point is well taken. Thank you for your comments.
Questions of mine. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. I was honored to be able to attend one of your meetings to stand in for Ms. Larson, and enjoyed hearing the feedback from everyone there. And as my colleagues have said, you do have a daunting task, and thank you for your hard work. A couple of questions. Will you be including in your data the amount of children that we could expect into our communities based on your long-range vision of what you'd like to see, so that it would help give us some guidelines as to what we would be looking at schools? That's always an issue for us and ongoing. And I think that's something that we need to be able to look at and plan on. And will you, or do you already work alongside with the workforce task? What are you on, Jim? The Workforce Development Task Force?
It's got a new name now.
Oh.
It's called the Greater Peninsula Workforce Development Board.
There you go. So do you all work alongside with these folks to help folks who maybe, now I'll tell you, my very first job was a pottery, and I won't tell you what year that was, but I made about $1.50 an hour. Now, I couldn't afford rent anywhere. I couldn't afford anything anywhere, but as I worked up and pursued greater and better, I was able to start paying rent and able to do this. So with that thought in mind, do you work alongside with these folks to help folks be able to perhaps make better income so that your task isn't as difficult long term? So
I can certainly speak to that if it's okay. As far as the two task force getting together, not, at this point we're focused on the housing options, but I think certainly under social services, the answer is yes. I mean, we recognize that you have to work with the whole individual and what they need, and it is a double-edged sword. The more you make, the more you can afford in theory. And certainly, we're looking at folks not just having jobs. If they would like to have careers, how can they get that career? So we have, some, I guess, side hustles going on as far as that and coordination. And so certainly working with economic development, we have talked about some of the workers that we have, for example, that are receiving public benefits that can do some training and have some access to internships and kinds of things. We have the supply, and then on their end, they have the demand of the companies moving in and the businesses looking for qualified workers who can be supported. So we have a plan to get together and talk about that. I have a staff member who attends the board meetings that you attend. And so certainly there's a lot of ways in which workers who would like to advance their careers can be supported. So it's about engaging with those individuals, letting them know what's out there, and supporting them as they start to work on those efforts. We have wonderful resources like Thomas Nelson Community College that certainly is expanding, their role. And so there's a lot of opportunities out there. It's just about connecting the dots. So, but it definitely goes hand in hand with those two.
Okay. And I think in the task force discussions, we've all acknowledged more than one time that this issue cannot be solved, or there's no solution unless we work in partnership with other agencies and other organizations.
And we have actually reached out to the city of Williamsburg and talked to them about where they are in their process for affordable housing, and we learned they're not quite where we are. But we certainly have talked with them and said, when you get to a point where you want to get together, we need to get together, because pretty much everything you do here is regional or is not successful. Families move and they go from one to another. So you have to be regional in really every approach that you do.
And part of your discussions, do you look at
areas in the county where you would like to see more affordable housing placed?
I don't think we've gotten that far.
We did look at maps at an earlier
Yeah.
meeting, but we're not at that. We're not really at that point. Jack or Jenny, do you want to add to that?
I think one of the things that I'm most interested in that has been touched on here is the whole issue of the mobile home parks. And a key interest of mine is preserving or rehabilitating what we already have so that we're not trying to put houses on new pieces of land that are really hard to find. One of the issues with the mobile home parks, and I will soon, in a matter of seconds, be out of my depth here, but the zoning in the mobile home parks is all over the map, is the best way to say it. Some of them aren't zoned residential. And because of that, the people who live there don't really have any protections. So we have to be very careful when we approach, or if we approach, the owners of those mobile home parks. But John and Mr. Hibble are absolutely right. You cannot build any wealth until you own the little piece of land that's under the mobile home and until it has a permanent foundation. So the other area that I was interested in looking at from my own perspective is, are there other hotels and motels in the area that are really struggling that could be converted in an economical way? We haven't talked specifically about that, but in terms of keeping the character of our community and the density that we have now and not wanting to go really crazy by changing the density, I'm all about trying to find things that look at the structures that are already in place and making sure through housing partnerships, through other places, that we can make sure that the community stays attractive and that those don't deteriorate even further. Just one more point I'd like to make is that in the subgroup that I'm in, and again, going back to the point that this is a regional initiative, we talked about trying to do a regional resource center so that anybody coming into the county or into Williamsburg City or York County could have a central navigator, online and a human to talk to, that would be able to respond to what are all the resources that are available in each of the different areas? What are the programs that can help out? What is the lay of the land in terms of housing, what's available at what price point? And we've learned that there is a very good foundation in place for that, and what we need to do is build on that. So I think that will be an idea that we'll be wanting to discuss with you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the things that you said is very interesting. Historically, mobile home parks were a temporary use. You know, they were kind of a holding thing, and so I think that's a good thing to look at making it a residential use. The other thing, I think Country Village, I believe the name of it used to be Blue Ribbon, at one time was trying to become or looking at becoming a mobile home subdivision or manufactured home subdivision. I don't know what happened with that, but that's an excellent idea.
I'll go back to John's opening thing, and it's all about priorities. And I'll try to be very brief. Everything you do is a two-edged sword, and always keep in mind the unintended consequences. One of the things I remember most vividly about trailer parks was one out on Jolly Pond Road where the septic systems were failing, and we were faced with an idea of either shutting them down or bringing the sewer in outside the PSA, which, as anybody knows my background, I'm just loath to do that. I did not want to do that. But we had a bunch of people who lived in that park come to the board meeting. made a very compelling case in front of us. And my concern was that by extending the sewer there, what I was worried about was that now this makes this land eminently developable. We bring the sewer in, he kicks all of them out, cuts them up to lots and sells it. Makes a nice profit. And so we were able to craft a deal that it protected those people and their residences. And so we decided to do that. And that's one of the things I think that brought home how tenuous it can be for folks in our community where they have difficulty with housing. So everything you do is a two-edged sword. And I'd say recognize that you're not going to come up with a comprehensive, complete solution. You're going to come up with partial solutions. And the priorities that John lays out are very important in trying to say what's the most effective, most doable, and gets the biggest bang for the buck, if you will. You're going to always have to deal with the competition between what we would like to do for government policies and the realities you have to deal with in market forces. Market forces are going to drive to the highest value of that land and the biggest buck you can get for it. And they're always competing. So let's keep in mind that, what can we accomplish? Keep it realistic. I know we're going to have to look at a couple of things like density, but there's the other side. The flip side to increase density is more school kids and higher costs of operating the county without the comparable revenues that we would otherwise get. So there's a cost to doing business to that. And I think that the focus probably necessarily has to be, at least initially, and probably predominantly, on rental, because that's where we're having the biggest problem. And I'll close with just the reverse scenario. My daughter, right out of college, got a job teaching in Newport News and bought a house in the city of Williamsburg. But it was because the teachers had a mortgage opportunity that was very unique, that barely allowed her to get in with daddy helping her a little bit, but she became a homeowner. And that's very, very difficult. The hardest part for her was getting the job up here. She commuted for 10 years to the Lower Peninsula. So people are commuting all over the place. My older daughter, when she lived with us, commuted all the way to the south side. So I keep in mind, that's a reality that you may not be able to overcome. People are living and way, way far away from where they work by choice in a lot of cases. Thank you.
Speaking of commuting, and Dr. McGlennon brought it up earlier too, 19,000 people commute from James City County to work elsewhere, and 19,000 people live elsewhere and commute into James City County. The most popular place for residents commuting to James City County is Williamsburg, to Dr. McGlennon's point. Yeah, exactly, sure. And well, you work in Williamsburg too, so you don't count. But 4,000 of the 19,000 people who commute into James City County each day come from Williamsburg. It's my personal opinion that that's just no big deal. That's not a problem. And York County is 2,100, so 6,100 people, and Charles City and New Kent don't make the table, but a third of the commuters come from those two localities, and I consider that just to be one jurisdiction, frankly. The top 10 places workers are commuting from, I'm sorry, I got this backwards, commuting from into James City County. Newport News is the largest at 4,500 by far. York County is 2,100, and Williamsburg is only 759. By the way, 633 James City County residents commute to Fairfax County. How about that? But the other, to extend this point, there have been a large number of multifamily housing units built in the last 3 years. Not all affordable, but multifamily. And you think of Newtown, the Promenade, Candle Station, Governor's Green, Settlers Market Quarter Path, which is in Williamsburg, but it's right on the border. And there are others that are approved but not built. Mason Park, Brookwood, Walnut Grove. Upper York County has 647 new dwelling units, either approved or proposed. And almost all of these are on entrance ramps to 199 or I-64, almost all of them. And they just, the developer of Quarter Path said they advertise heavily in Newport News. And so there you are. I don't have an answer for that or a solution, but it's a fact.
Yeah.
So commuting is part of being a bedroom community, and that's kind of where we are, I think.
So I would just thank you, and I very much appreciate being a part of it. I can talk freely, so I won't take up a whole lot of time because I get to come. I just would say a couple of remarks. A very smart person tells me a lot that we have an affordable housing, but we have an economic development problem, and that would be Mr. Haldeman. Let me give credit where credit's due, and so it's definitely something that we have to continue to look at. I appreciate that people may want to live rural, but I come out at Jamestown Road in the mornings, and if there's a ferry coming from Surrey, I'm waiting a very, very long time. I bet if you asked a lot of people, they would prefer to live closer so that they were not having to make that commute every day. So there may be some in those statistics that like the rural character, but I also think it's just simply an affordability issue. And so I'm not ready to rule out anything yet. I'm very much interested in what other communities are doing, how they began to solve this issue. And I know we're not going to solve every issue, but I do think we're going to have to look at a variety of things. I do worry a little bit when we start talking about just one area, taking all the affordable housing. I don't think that's the way that we want to go. I moved back here from Charlotte, North Carolina, and I couldn't believe, we had a home there, and it was very difficult to find an affordable, and this has been many years ago, but it was very difficult to find an affordable house here in James City County. And, the other kind of neat thing was the neighborhood that we moved from in Charlotte, North Carolina, was a multi-cost neighborhood. So we had a starter home, but then in the middle of the neighborhood was a little bit more expensive home, and the back of the neighborhood was an even more expensive home. But all of our kids went to school together. So the fact that we had an $86,000 house, we were in school with people that had $500,000 houses. We don't have that here. That becomes very apparent when redistricting comes and everybody starts talking about free and reduced numbers. And we have some where they're skyrocketing, those schools are in desperate need, and some where it's very, very low. And that just has a whole nother issues that come with it, or not issues, but issues. So I really appreciate everything that you're doing. I don't know that we're ever going to get this tackled up by December, January, because it's a lot. And so it's probably going to have to be an ongoing conversation. But I'm hoping that we can start making some headway. And it is I do have to just give up. It's such an engaged group, and so much work goes into it, and it's taken very seriously, and I just so appreciate all that. So, thank you.
One other thing, this came up at our last meeting, to how do we approach this, and a suggestion was made that this could be merged somehow into the comprehensive plan revision. If the task force can narrow the focus to Dr. McGonagall's point, and at least structure all this data into a digestible format you might want to consider putting it into the comprehensive plan revision. Just a thought.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you all for all of your comments, which we will take back to the task force and will certainly inform the rest of our work. I would say that I don't think there's anybody sitting around the task force table that thinks it's going to be solved by next January. But I think we all know it's a long-term commitment on the part of the county and the people who live in this community. And hopefully we can find some short-term and longer-term recommendations for you to chew on and work toward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
John, get your intern.
I need an HVAC intern with me so I can fit.
Yeah, I know. It's really hot.
I did feel some cold air at one time, but it quit.
Oof. Somebody didn't fix it. So next we have a presentation by Amy Jordan, there you go, Director of Economic Development, on the proposed Eastern Virginia Regional Industrial Facility Authority. And you have people with you, and you will introduce them. How are you this afternoon?
Great, thank you. Either you can sit up if you want. So, do introductions here. So we have Bob McKenna. Bob McKenna is the Executive Director of the Virginia Peninsula Chamber of Commerce, and they are also serving as the fiscal agent for the RIFA, and we're sort of very instrumental in helping to kind of pull these pieces together. Steve Mead and Todd Lynn, they are both with Patton, Hornum, Hatton, and Diamondstein, and they are our consulting attorneys that are helping us to form the RIFA. So,
okay. Thank you.
So with that, I'm going to hand it over to, I guess, Todd, who's going to run through the slides here.
Yeah. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
As Amy indicated, I'm Todd Lenz, my partner Steve Mead with Pat Hornum, Hatton, and Diamondstein. We're here representing the RIFA, as we call it, and we're here to update you on the progress of the RIFA. Amy has a PowerPoint presentation she's going to run through with us, and we'll make some comments as we go through that. Our first slide is simply an acknowledgement of the statutory authority for the RIFA. The second slide outlines the purpose of the RIFA as set forth in the statute, but specifically it enables localities to combine their resources to tackle projects and facilities that may not be possible for a single locality to take on its own. The formation of the RIFA is effected through the governing bodies of the participating localities concurrently enacting ordinances to participate in the RIFA. As a part of those ordinances, the organizational documents, the agreement to create RIFA, and the bylaws are attached and effected through that process. Those ordinances are filed with the Secretary of the Commonwealth, who issues a certificate whereupon we have a RIFA. That's our formation mechanism, but the real sort of substance of the RIFA is, as we go down the road, it creates the opportunity to participate in participation agreements for individual projects. So the actual commitment to create the RIFA is really sort of the opportunity to have a seat at the table to participate in the projects that will be considered by the RIFA going forward. But there's really no obligation financially or otherwise simply by virtue of the passing of the ordinance, because you have the opportunity to participate in those projects that you like and choose to participate in, and frankly not to participate in any project if you so choose. The initial proposed project is the Unmanned Systems Project. using initial funding from Go Virginia. Our next slide simply outlines the anticipated localities that will participate in the RIFA. The statute gives flexibility for the RIFA to be expanded in the future to add additional localities from the region. That's a simple process. It requires a majority board approval, and the local ordinance that wants to be added simply has to pass an ordinance comparable to the ordinances passed by the initial participating localities.
So that every locality has one vote? Is that the idea? Or
So
when you say majority vote?
Well, yes. So the organizational mechanism for the RIFA is a board of directors.
Mm-hmm.
Each locality will appoint 2 members to that board of directors. And so there's various matters that are reserved to a vote of, for instance, changes in the organizational documents, participation in a participation agreement, that are reserved to the Board of Supervisors or the governing body of the localities as to whether or not they're going to, elect to participate in a participation agreement or would agree to an amendment of the organizational documents. But sort of the standard business of the RIFA will be affected by the board and by a vote of effectively 4 members of the board, which would represent 1 board member, and it would have to be 1 board member from each of 4 localities. So you have 4 out of 7 in essence. But it's a board of 14 members. So each locality will appoint 2 board members, and then you have the opportunity to appoint 2 alternative board members, 2 alternate board members to serve in their absence as well. And this is our slide on the governing body. One of the elected board members is required to be a member of the locality's governing board, or governing body, excuse me. The other one's at your discretion. There's been a collective recommendation sort of flowing out of the economic development directors from each of the localities that the second board member, and this is a purely suggestion, it's not anything mandatory on you, but that the second board member be a member of the locality's economic development authority, and that the one of the alternates be the economic development director for the locality.
When will that be decided?
The election of the board members.
Mm-hmm.
It's what's that?
For the appointment, right.
Yeah. Go
So the appointments will be made by each governing body. So you will make the appointment, determine who that elected official is, and then who the second person is, whether it's an EDA or another business member of the community, as well as who the alternates are.
So each locality could either have 2 board members, or one locality could have a board member, EDA.
Correct.
It wouldn't change. I mean, it wouldn't be set in stone by the organization that you will have one or the other. The board will decide who they want to send.
Right, exactly. At least one needs to be an elected official.
Correct.
And beyond that, then you can determine who the others are. Some of the localities I know, because of the way their funding is running and the way they're using their EDAs, want to make sure and ensure that they have an EDA member that is present at that table as one of the appointments. Having the elected official was very important as well, because, again, I mean, this is all the localities come together, so they really need to have an elected official at the table that was helping to guide and steer those conversations. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, the only qualification for board members is that they be residents of the Commonwealth of Virginia. So this is sort of the substance of the RIFA opportunity is what we call participation agreements. It's the opportunity to take on, facility projects. They're not limited to industrial projects. They can be residential, commercial, they can be recreational. So there's broad authority to take on, facility projects of, varying natures. Again, as we've noted, there's no obligation if James City County elects to participate in the RIFA to participate in any of the participation agreements. It'll be entirely voluntary on your part as those projects are brought forward in the future. And how the economics of those will work, the participation financially and otherwise will be negotiated by agreement in each of those agreements.
Per project or overall?
Excuse me?
Per project or overall?
Yeah, per project.
Per project, okay.
Absolutely. And our next slide simply highlights the element of the statute that you can actually, share revenue so that the locality can determine with respect to an authority project in its jurisdiction, to allocate the revenues that flow from that facility to the actual RIF of the authority itself. That's the first point to make here. The second point to make is that the member localities can agree to revenue and economic growth sharing arrangements with respect to tax revenues and other income that flow from any facility that's a part of the authority. This just points out in terms of how withdrawal or termination from the RIFA would work. If a locality decided it no longer wanted to participate in the authority, you'd simply obtain approval of a majority of the other jurisdictions to, approve that withdrawal. Obviously, in addition to that, if there was a dissolution of the authority, participation would cease as well.
So just as a kind of what if the RIFA were in your jurisdiction and you decided you wanted to end the agreement because now you wanted to capture all the resources? Can you do that? Presumably you'd have to get the other localities to agree.
You would have to do that.
Absolutely.
Right.
You can't unwind the participation agreement.
Yeah, and there is a statutory provision for what happens to the property, the title to the property. I think it's allocated out to participating jurisdictions on a pro rata basis. And so,
if there's a dissolution of the entire RIFA, then any property, real estate, personal property, funds, it's paid out pro rata to the participating jurisdictions. But to your earlier point, you can't just simply opt out and then sort of recapture that particular facility. It would still be subject to the RIFA. And in fact, you would, by virtue of opting out, you would forego participation in it, because if the revenue is allocated to the authority or the RIFA already, you'd actually take yourself out of the revenue equation for participating in that particular facility in the jurisdiction.
So I'm trying to wrap my brain around all this. So you have a locality that has some land, say us. You have a locality that maybe doesn't have enough land to do a project. So if we were the ones that had the land and we say, okay, we're members, we want to have this project here, and we have all this revenue coming in from the project, if it's just between those two, if this locality has donated their finances to us to put it here, is the revenue just between those two localities, or does it share it amongst everyone?
It's purely negotiated in whatever participation in the agreement is for whatever facility. So it's you can customize each participation opportunity as you see fit.
So all the jurisdictions belong to the RIFA, but on any individual project, it may only be 3 or 4 that are investing and sharing the.
Absolutely. Correct. And how you invest and share is entirely by the agreement that you negotiate with the participating locality. So
we can just run an example. Say we had a piece of land, we had a prospect, and water and sewer were going to cost a good deal of money to get there. Williamsburg doesn't have any land, but they may want to participate in that project to get a share of the revenue from what comes in, taxes or whatever. And so they would participate by giving money perhaps to a designated amount to put in the water and sewer. Then over time, they would get revenue back.
They who?
The city of Williamsburg. Yeah, put it. And I guess I have a question that's just the opposite way, because it happened years ago that there were industrial development authorities that approved developments, not necessarily what the original county thought was an economic development, that the EDA had turned down, but they went to another county, got EDA bonds to do development in the other county. Could that kind of thing happen here, where one of the other jurisdictions can look through the RIFA to finance something in another locality? Or does it go the host locality, the one that makes that decision only?
I would say the answer is it depends on who owns the property. If it's a property that's controlled by your EDA already or by the county directly, it would require your approval. If it's a property that's owned by a private party, that would be a possibility. It's very difficult for me to see how it would ever get implemented, because it would still be, they wouldn't get anything out of doing it, because the revenue would still come to James City County if the property is here. So even in a situation where it's technically possible, I don't think, Mr. Porter, it would ever happen, because the taxes are going to come to you if they did that. I can foresee a scenario where maybe there's enough benefits by getting enough high-paying jobs that would be attractive to them, but it's really hard to imagine that it would work in that way. I think you would still be in control.
So, and I guess to that, they might go to that other locality to participate in a bond, but that locality or their EDA is just profiting from the interest that's paid on that bond. They're not going to be able to capture any of the tax revenue generated from the project that would be in the host locality.
And you're saying there's no fee to be a member, is that correct?
So you've paid, I think, an initial $2,500 to
$25,000.
$25,000. What is it, $2,500?
Well, $2,500 is just come out just an establishment, but we've budgeted allocated. Yeah,
okay. For the creation of the RIFA.
And then after that, there's no dues. There's nothing as far as
you'd have to agree to dues. If there are operational dues implemented, you'd have to vote to approve those, but you couldn't be
right.
All the governing bodies.
Right.
Yeah, four out of the seven. What I'm thinking is if 4 out of the 7 wanted to go in a direction, then they could force the other 3 to pay X amount of dues to basically, I'm looking at the devil in the room. Mm-hmm. In order to build the company up, or RIFA up, in order to have executive directors and start building a little empire in a roundabout way, not saying it would happen, just the devil for the whole thing.
Yes, sir.
Then the other 4 jurisdictions would have to then pony up, or the other 3 would have to pony up what 4 did. So 4 jurisdictions could run the entire thing and make the other 3 come into play if so wanted, almost like Monopoly. I mean, you own Park Place and you've got them.
Right. I think that's a very astute question, and we thought of that as well, and we put a provision in that requires it to go back to the local governing bodies for approval. So it would then have to get approved by the local governing bodies for those operational dues. We added a particular section that talks about for all of these things, you must go back to the governing bodies for approval. So I think we've capped that risk for you.
Because I've never seen an entity that has stayed free
for very long.
And I know there's and so that's what I'm always looking at. What is the cost going to be?
Yes.
And I noticed in your presentation, it says for the repayment of the portions debt incurred in general dues.
Yeah, and part of that
general dues are that's why I'm thinking, okay, dues aren't today, but they will be tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And that language comes directly from the Act, the RIFA Act that the General Assembly put in place. And so it contemplates general dues. In this instance, the plan is to use existing economic development staff. I mean, we're going to use Amy and the other economic development directors to provide that kind of local staff. unless the localities decide there's a project that justifies some use. But right now, there's no plan to have to use it all.
Let me ask, I'm not totally clear on the answer to your question. The organizations get started. We decide that they need to have staff. They need to have certain things to get certain things done. So there's money is needed. So we're gonna establish dues. It's not that we get outvoted 4-3 in the body, but it comes back to our governing body. Does our governing body have the ability to say, no, we're not going to pay dues? Or do the other 3 or 4, if the other 6 say, yeah, we're going to pay dues, are we just toast or what?
No, okay. It's a unanimous vote.
A unanimous vote of the governing bodies to establish what the operational.
It's a unanimous vote of the governing bodies that on the 4-3.
No.
Each one.
No, it takes 7 jurors. The governing bodies of all 7 jurisdictions to approve operational dues.
We can approve it 3-2 in here.
Right.
That makes us either for it or against it, whichever way.
They have to be 7.
But all 7 jurisdictions
have to
vote too.
So all 7.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I wasn't understanding. I was thinking that 4 could run the gamut, and the other 3 could. And that's in the statute. Where is that written?
That's in our agreement creating RIFA.
Okay, that's the agreement in there.
Right, and we've contemplated certain things like that where, we should go back to the governing body. So we've incorporated that.
And always worried because, the government never stops growing. It's just how tight you get the belt on it.
Right.
And, I can see later an executive director, an assistant, a secretary, $1 million reserve fund, and start, we need this and we need that. Not that I would be totally against it if it does, move economic development.
If it does what you wanted it to do.
Yeah, but most of the time, it's another program to do another program to do another program that gets nothing done. And so that's why I just want to make sure that we're not getting into something that next thing you know, I think it's a good idea as far as utilizing all our resources regionally. I can't afford this project. Hey, York County, maybe there's only 2 of us in it. Can we barter the deal if we say we have something in James City County and it's going to promote something in York County as well? We can't afford it. York, you want to get in on this 50-50 or 75-25 or, and it's only the 2. Do we have to open it up to all 7 members, or can we select just one member that we think is going to work real well with us? Do we have an option, or does that go to the 7-member board and they tell us in James City County what we have to do or can do as far as opening it up to the members, or can we just barter a deal on this, in the back room on the table?
I think it would have to go as an option for the others, but you could set the terms on what you would be willing to do in this particular project. I mean, it's your project, it's in your jurisdiction. So, you could say, this is what we're going to require, even if it's unreasonable. It's your county, it's your land. Right. And so they could either then participate or opt out. And so if it ends up being just 2, or there's 3 that are willing to meet your terms, yes, then you've got those 3 or those 2 that could go forward.
Do we have to accept them if they're members?
Have to accept them into the project?
Into the project?
Only if they're willing to agree to the conditions that you're, making the proposal for the project.
But you set the terms.
Yes.
So, as a part of any negotiation, you can establish the terms that you're willing to participate, and if they don't.
We want you to give us 50% of the money, we give 1% of the profit.
Right, that's a good example. That might be a bit unreasonable, but you can do it.
But if I only want to work, and this is just devil again, if I only want to work with one jurisdiction at the table, not all 7 or not 3.
Yes.
I can't craft it a way that it's so high that now they can't do it in order to keep the others out. But can I just say at the table, I just want York and I are going to work good together on this, or Williamsburg and I, or Gloucester and I are going to work good because it fits what both localities are doing. Can I work that deal in the table with the 7, or do they get because then once I start cutting it up, Now I'm making less. I got the land, I got the business, I got everything. I can't get it over the finish line, of course, so I really got nothing. But if I've got it that far and I can grab one other county to help me get across the finish line, then I'm only paying a certain portion. If I dice it up 3 or 4 ways, I'm cutting more money out of my pocket.
Right.
So can I do that?
And I would say the framework is sufficiently flexible to allow that. Whether you would get tremendous political blowback, I think is a different issue. Legally, you could do that, yes. You probably would place.
You don't have to worry about politically with me.
The other thing you can do is you have X amounts you want to get.
Right.
Then you can open it up for anybody, but that's the only one so that you don't have it the rest of it divvied up. You can say, this is what I need to make the deal. And then you can put it out and the other 6 can take a whack at it, or only one.
Now, what if I do that and put it out?
All of them.
And one of them right off the bat says, I'll take it, I'm in. I close the others out? Or do they get a chance to divvy that portion that one county? If I've got 60%, I say I need 40% of whatever I'm short of.
Right.
And York County goes and right off the bat says, I'll take the 40. Do I have to divide that 40 up into 3? If there's 3 other communities that want it, do I have to divide that up? Because that may kill a deal I'm working with York County that they're going to do and bring back to me, and I get that 40.
Well, and I don't know that there's any statutory prohibition to any of what you're describing. I think it's one of those things, though. It's with any good contract negotiation, you want to try to be diplomatic and go about it in a way that you're not you're not hopefully defeating the purpose of cooperation. That's the spirit of this particular opportunity. But I don't think there's any prohibition to what you're describing. I just think how you go about it is probably the key.
Yeah.
And with any of them, we're going to look at that ROI, that return on investment. And so I think to Mr. Porter's point, that if, we had an opportunity and we said, okay, but we're going to retain 60% of all the tax revenue, and there's the other 40. So whether one comes to the table and is willing to pony up everything and gets that other 40, whether 4 of them come together and divide that and they each get 10%, but we're still keeping our 60. So this is our what we're presenting as an opportunity.
Right. I'm just thinking of the second deal. Mm-hmm. While you're working the first one, there could be a second one you're working to get their 60 and me 40.
Right.
And I'm always looking out ahead of,
you are.
Not closing that one door, but the second deal's the sweet one.
And Mr. Hippel, just in the Ripley's Believe It or Not category, the federal government has fewer employees today than they did in 1950. So,
do they?
Yeah.
Wow. So is there a percentage already established? You were talking 64. You just
every opportunity is its own participation agreement and its own deal terms. And so, the initial formation of this is to go ahead. The first project is the Hampton Roads Unmanned Systems Facility on Penniman Road in York County that received the Go Virginia grant. So the money that I referenced was each locality has a portion that they're matching for that. Step 1 of that, and the milestone requirement was by November 1st to have the formation of the RIFA, which is under the statutory code what creates that opportunity for all of those localities to participate collectively in that project. Then after that, it would go out for architecture and engineering plans, design, and so on and so forth. And so, that the initial thing is to set that up. The beauty, though, of the RIFA is that it doesn't need to be just for that project. It could be for something, we're thinking of development opportunities, so it could be site-specific. It could be working on some sort of workforce development facility with Thomas Nelson and the participating localities. So it could be various regional assets that allow the localities to participate together in those again, can build that opportunity. So you have both the cost share but the revenue share.
we've got a project, we're working it, and we put it out. We had 2 other jurisdictions that hey, we love that. We want to be part of it. Now, is it, if they're giving you funds, and I've always gone by the theory of the man who has the most money makes the decisions. So if they're giving you funds, but we have the majority of the funds and we're heading the project up, do they have a say in anything in our project, or are they just like the bank in the back corner bringing the money in and we're paying the money back out as the project takes off? Will they have a say in our project that in those jurisdictions can say, come in and say, no, we'd rather see this being put on the project, and we don't want to have plants around this, or we, can they say anything on our project?
Well, so what I think you're describing is a particular opportunity that's put into a participation agreement. So it's really going to be whatever that participation agreement says.
Okay.
So you're going to want to negotiate on a per project basis.
Right.
How do we want to handle that particular project? And if we want to have sort of authority to dictate how that project is developed, and we just want to receive money from another jurisdiction, that could be part of the negotiation and part of the final deal terms for that project.
That's what I was checking on. It could just be funding, or if we decide, hey, this project's big enough that we want to enhance something else. So it's not only funding, but you're part of the planning process of this. Okay, that's all I want to check. Thanks.
I guess I had a question about whether there are other such entities functioning in the Commonwealth now, and what their track record has been, whether there are others functioning more broadly in the country.
There are, and I think you probably have more information on that than I do, the ones that are out there. So
Our research, and it's kind of an interesting quirk that we can't tell you exact numbers, because apparently as each governor's administration closes down and moves out, they send all the documents to the Library of Virginia, which is currently indexing Governor Kane's documents. So we can't give you exact numbers. We can tell you that we found 8 that are operating. I found 2 that I could tell had absolutely done projects. One was out in the Pennsylvania and Danville area. They had, I think, 7 participants in theirs as well. It was one of the larger ones. Most of these are 3, and they seem to kind of limit to that. Some of them include towns as opposed to cities and counties. But they had done a large park and put apparently a high-tech education building on it together, and that seemed to be doing well. No idea about the financial side of it, but it appeared to be it was up and functional. But unfortunately, as I said, we're a little bit limited on being able to get information from the state government on that one. So, we know they're out there. We don't have much as far as record of what they're doing or how they're doing.
Yeah, because I think we want to have some sense of what the kinds of returns of investment actually are, and things like this, and whether it may have the effect of sort of dislocating our normal practice, where we often expect developers to bring something to the table, and maybe with the presence of a RIFA, they think you're going to be
excluded,
picking up some of that.
Well, I think that's a great point. One of the things that is allowed under the RIFA is under the particular projects, the individual projects, you can consider and bring in folks from the outside that are not necessarily related to one of the jurisdictions. So one of the examples I use, it's privately owned property, and there's a lot of that here, of course. But if that person wanted to come forward, a developer, and say, hey, I can't get the sewer and water out there, but you guys do this through the RIFA, maybe we can. So you can partner with them. You can also partner with people like Bob's group or with the College of Women Married. Julie Sums has been very involved with this and very supportive of it. And so we think there's a lot of opportunities. That's probably, in my mind, it's one of the best things about this program, the way the General Assembly set it up and established it. It's very flexible. I mean, it's kind of limited only by what someone can think of to put in it. Once we get this structure created and in place as an umbrella, each project that drops under it, it can be very flexible to react to, whatever, strange scenario or particular scenario like Mr. Hipple was suggesting. You can, whatever the facts are that can fit it, and we can all come to an agreement, you can make it happen, including getting private developers into it. So you can partner with virtually anyone in this environment, which you didn't used to be able to do with authorities. They were very much a government entity. This is a little more broad.
I had one other question, and that is that as this thing progresses along toward the deadline you're looking at, where does the funding come to do the background research and work and preparation? In other words, this didn't occur just out of thin air. Money had to be somewhere. Where did it come from?
So as we mentioned, the creation to get Patton Dynasty on board, that was the 2,500 that each of the localities put up, which then included a match from the Go Virginia funding. And so, pretty much all of it has been beyond bringing them on board, is all been staff driven from the directors. And Bob could probably speak a little bit to that as well, as far as our, numerous meetings he has hosted and bringing all 7 jurisdictions to the table, or as I like to call it, the Jedi table. But yeah.
Thank you.
So they're serving as the fiscal agent to
just for the establishment.
Just for the establishment.
Okay, right. And it's Go Virginia versus plus the money that came from the 7 jurisdictions.
Right, because the Go Virginia money required a matching grant.
Okay. All right.
Are we limited to 7 or?
No.
We can go.
So we can use them.
You
can go statewide if you want.
Okay, so it's not just the district covered, it's statewide.
No, and that was part of the, and I think we might have a couple more slides on that, but that was part of the reason for even the name of the Eastern Virginia, is that we have had others that have expressed interest, some other neighboring localities, we could consider the participation, bringing them in if we so chose.
Okay.
And I will say, I'll let you add to that. I think, though, what is great about that, because there has been some concern from some of the smaller localities that, the way that we have set this up so that every locality gets the same vote, and it's not done on a per capita, I think is very important, because if we did start inviting some larger localities to the table, there's still just one vote. So.
And I know at the TPO and PDC that we're talking about where some communities have the money and some have the land, and how to bring those together so they can both get something out of that for all the citizens, and not just, this community, just because it's full of land, it doesn't have the revenue in order to get projects going. And this community over here has the revenue, so they want to put it to work and do something, to enhance what they've already got and make it larger. Now, out of the 6 that y'all know of that are existing now, are they all the same as they were when they started, or has any of them got an executive director or anything else, just to see, or do you know that depth of leadership in there?
I would say that we only have that information for 3 of them, and they all seem to be operating, with existing staff of some level. Now, it's not all an EDA directed thing. Sometimes they've used other county staff, but it seems to be that they've kept them very lean, which I think is a key, because as you said, you can certainly get bloat that gobbles up any proceeds you get out of it.
It does. It'll eat it right up, and
right.
You gain nothing but employees in retirement. And
exactly.
Not that that's a bad thing. It's just it's one other thing that adds to the bottom line of what we're trying in our budget sessions to try to keep as tight as possible and keep our existing employees moving forward and happy.
And it seems to be a pretty popular view around the state from what we're seeing. They all seem to be following the same pattern.
Everything's so tight.
The one thing I would add that's interesting about it, and it really shows the strength of this program, is by bringing in Gloucester and by Gloucester agreeing to cooperate, they're in a different Go Virginia region, and so they qualify for a different pool of funds by themselves or with Fredericksburg. All the peninsula jurisdictions, that are the other 6 jurisdictions, are all in I think we're in Region 6.
Region 5.
5, and they're 6. But the interesting thing about combining is it gives us a much better chance at getting that next swat of Go Virginia funds, because when you've got 2 regions cooperating, then the state likes that even better, because that's obviously what they're trying to do and what they're trying to give us an incentive to do. And so we should have an even better chance of getting larger funding and more funding from Go Virginia just by really implementing some regional cooperation. That all started with the economic development directors, really. And it's pretty amazing how that's kind of grown from grassroots and fits right into what the state has made available now. But it's a great example of what we can do if we kind of reach across the river and put our hand out.
So we should go get 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9.
I like the way you think.
Absolutely. That'll add to that. Go Virginia.
All right. So what do you need from us next?
Did you want to finish running through this
I think
list,
that was-
or is that all of it?
I think that was it.
Oh, is that it? Oh, questions, there we go.
Yeah, okay.
So at this point, we will be bringing the ordinance back forward in the agreement at the next meeting in order to meet the timeframe set forth for the Go Virginia funding. The 7 jurisdictions do need to get that adopted before November 1st. And so we will have that at the October 9th meeting. So if there are any, additional questions or things that we can bring back, because we are, finalizing those documents now.
Okay. All right.
So if any board member have any questions, please send them to Amy, so that she can answer them. It's time to get you all up to speed and everything for that October 9th.
Or the new county administrator. I thought that's a good thing.
Well,
Send them to the new county administrator.
All right. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and then we need to go into, can I get a motion to enter closed session for consideration of personnel matter, the appointment of individuals to county boards and/or commissions pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A1 of the Code of Virginia.
So moved.
Thank you. Mr. Porter?
All right, Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
I'm just,
Aye.
It's all right.
You there?
okay.
Okay. If I could get a motion to certify the closed session?
Move to certify that we only spoke about those items we indicated to speak about.
Thank you. Mr. Porter?
This has to be a roll call vote.
Yes.
Ms. Sadler.
Aye.
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. If we could have a motion for appointments?
Yes, move that Emma Zarin Newman be appointed to the Clean County Commission, that Virginia Fisher be appointed to the Arts Commission, that the Social Service Advisory Board, we reappoint Carlos Sprouse and appoint Josh Moore, that the Agency on Aging, Ted Jurasek, be reappointed, and that the Board of Adjustments and Appeal, John Osmore and Jeremy Finley be appointed.
Thank you. Mr. Porter?
Ms. Sadler.
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right.
And I have one other item, and I would just like to ask if the board would agree to ask that an initiating resolution be brought before us for the purpose of having a proposed ordinance amendment to provide for buffering of watersheds in cases where we're dealing with storage of chemicals or gasoline and propane. And other substances that could contaminate the water supply.
Okay. Yes, do we need to vote on that or just a
I
consensus?
think we just,
Okay.
I just take it to stay.
Bring it forward.
All right.
I think Paul was aware.
Yep.
Okay. Prior to adjourning this meeting until 5 p.m. on October 9th for our regular meeting, at which point we will be joined by our new county administrator. So Mr. Porter would not allow us to do allows probably a little strong, but he did not wish us to do any type of resolution or proclamation. But Mr. Porter,
balloons.
we got him balloons. We did. Thank you, Ms. Sadler. And
Thank you for
yes, Mr.
organizing
Porter,
lunch.
just thank you so much for everything. I think that you were just a much needed person at a much needed time, and we have greatly benefited from your experience and the way that you deal with people, especially our employees, and the way that you've dealt with the board has been most professional. And you're just an outstanding person, and I'm very glad that you came when you did.
Well, you all have no idea what an honor and a privilege it's been.
So, but we will miss you.
We will miss you.
So,
Thank
yes.
you for calling me your favorite.
We're not clapping about the
We
video.
love you, so we always will.
There you go. So,
Your last roll call?
That's right.
yes, with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Mr. Porter?
All right. Mr. Eisenhower. Mr. McMillan.
Aye.
Mr. Hibble.
Aye.
Ms. Sadler.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
You're done.
Good.